Ever thought Power BI, Synapse, and Data Factory were speaking different languages? What if one new platform could finally get all your Microsoft 365 data working together without another pile of connectors or patchwork scripts? Today, we're breaking down Microsoft Fabric, the hidden architecture that can actually give you a single source of truth with one lake at the core. So, how does Fabric fit into the workflows you already use? And why should every M365 admin start paying attention right now? Fabric's big promise, one platform to unify your data. Let's be honest, the data tools in Microsoft 365 have a way of multiplying, and every new buzzword seems to come with its own storage and, if we're being honest, a fresh round of admin pain. We've all watched Power BI, Synapse, and Data Factory grow into core pieces of the stack, each promising insights, speed, and a cleaner way forward. In reality, most teams keep these tools at arm's length from each other. The finance group might run half their world in Power BI, building slick dashboards and KPIs, while operations is deep in Synapse crunching raw event logs. Ask them to share numbers for a board deck, and you can almost hear the groan echo down the hallway. It's not just old-fashioned siloed thinking. Even in the cloud era, just getting two reports to use the same data set often turns into a scavenger hunt. If you've ever spent an afternoon figuring out why permissions don't quite line up or why your data seems to multiply every time a connector is involved, you know the reality. Sure, we've got APIs and templates. They work up to a point, but then someone copies a data set just in case. Or SharePoint gets pulled in as a workaround, and suddenly half your organization is running on duplicate data while the other half is waiting for a sync to finish. When the compliance team tries to trace where a number came from, good luck. The pure reporting overhead eats up days. If that sounds dramatic, it's not just anecdotal. The IDC measured this slog, and researchers found that nearly 70% of analytics time in big companies goes to wrangling, prepping, and reconciling data across different tools, instead of actually analyzing it. That's not just slowing down businesses, it's holding entire teams hostage to manual workarounds. Picture this. Someone in finance wants to create a KPI summary in Power BI, drawing numbers from both sales and logistics. But operations keeps their raw inventory data locked in a Synapse workspace that nobody outside IT understands. The finance team spins their wheels waiting for exports that need to be massaged in Excel before import. By the time the numbers finally show up, they're already out of date. Meanwhile, compliance teams are told to verify something simple, let's say how much personally identifiable information sits in the warehouse. They end up running searches across 3 different tools, sometimes waiting days for someone to ping them with a file that could have been shared automatically if the systems actually talk to each other. It's a painful workaround, not a system anyone would call seamless. Trying to run reporting in this environment is like juggling 5 separate calendars and then acting surprised when you miss a meeting. Each data tool in M365 has a little calendar icon of its own, but none of them actually share events, so you might as well go back to sticky notes. Even when IT spins up connector after connector, problems just change shape. Permissions get out of sync. A user changes teams but still has read access to sensitive data in an old workspace. Suddenly, a batch job kicks off and drops yesterday's numbers into a cache somewhere nobody can find. Unified reporting? Only on the surface. Now, the promise behind Microsoft Fabric is, finally, a break from all that duct tape. Instead of treating each tool as a standalone island, Fabric pulls Power BI, Synapse, Data Factory, and a handful of other services into a single architecture with one leg quietly anchoring them all. Instead of deciding where to store your data, you just drop it into one lake, and it's visible to every connected tool at once. There's no need for a new batch job every time you want raw numbers in one place and a dashboard in another. Permissions, compliance policies, and even lineage aren't patched on later. They're all part of the same platform. The Fabric name gets thrown around a lot, but it's doing something more interesting than just giving admins another dashboard to stare at. For years, these tools have worked next to each other, never really with each other. Fabric isn't just a shiny new wrapper that hides the usual mess. It's a real shift, the equivalent of replacing 5 awkward calendars with one that actually works everywhere. That's the kind of foundational change that opens the door for M365 admins to rethink their data estate. But you might be asking, this can't just be marketing, right? Our guard is up. We've all heard unified before, and too many times it's just a new landing page shaken together with logos and a theme color. What's different here is simple. Fabric turns data infrastructure from something teams assemble to something they can actually count on. With one leg at the center, It's like your organization's central nervous system for data. One place to govern, to control, to get insight. No more islands, no more duct tape, no more musical chairs with permissions. This is where things start to get interesting for anyone building data pipelines or managing M365 environments. Fabric's approach changes not just what's possible, but how you work with data end to end. The obvious question is, how does it actually work under the hood? And more importantly, what does it look like for admins who have to live with these tools every day? Let's pull back the curtain and see what's really different when you switch to Fabric. Inside the architecture, one lake and the Fabric framework. If you've got any history managing Microsoft 365, you probably don't even flinch when you hear promises about unified platforms anymore. We've all seen the pitch decks, and after rolling out half a dozen tools that barely acknowledge each other, it's easy to take this sort of talk with a grain of salt. So let's talk about what actually changes when Microsoft 365 services run on Fabric, because the shift isn't just cosmetic, and it actually fixes some pain points that have only grown as the M365 stack keeps expanding. The old setup felt more like juggling than actual management. Picture a typical day for an admin. You're overseeing a data factory pipeline that spits data into its own managed space. Synapse is running advanced analytics on a separate workspace, and PowerBI is somewhere else entirely, demanding refreshed imports on a tight deadline. If you need to enforce a compliance rule or change a permission, you do it 3 different times in 3 different dashboards. By the end of the week, you're managing not just data, but the quirks and limitations of every tool in the chain. When someone asks about where a set of numbers originated, maybe for an audit, it's a mix of hunting through logs and hoping no one changed things behind your back. Security audits, that's basically a game of telephone across disconnected services. Data connectors, for all their claims, mostly just patch holes. You run into situations where data lineage becomes a tangled mess. Nobody's quite sure if the numbers in Power BI are the exact figures that started life in Synapse, or if something got transformed, lost, or duplicated along the way. Governance policies get watered down with each handoff. Even with everything technically in the cloud, you're still managing clusters of silos. And every time you map identities or permissions across services, it feels less like a policy and more like a leap of faith. The best analogy is water. Imagine every M365 data tool as its own well. You draw a bucket from Power BI, another from Synapse, another from Data Factory, each one separate, needing its own guardrails, its own tests for purity, maybe even a different key to unlock the well. Now, Microsoft Fabric changes this entirely. Instead of dozens of little wells, you're working with a shared reservoir, one lake. You pour in the data once, and every tool drinks from the same source. No more pipe networks snaking everywhere, no more leaky connections. If you need to test water quality, you do it once. No surprises downstream. This shift is already visible in everyday scenarios. Let's say someone uploads an Excel file or dataset into Power BI. Before Fabric, that file would live in Power BI's own workspace. If you wanted Synapse or Data Factory to use it, you'd export, re-import, or build half a dozen batch jobs to shuffle files around. Every movement introduced a fresh set of permissions, another set of logs, and another place for errors to sneak in. Now, with Fabric and the One Lake Foundation, that uploaded dataset is instantly available to Synapse and Data Factory. The file doesn't duplicate itself behind your back. It simply becomes accessible everywhere under the same governance policies you already set. No more copy-paste, no more brittle data flows that break every time something upstream changes. Microsoft has architected One Lake to act as a single logical data lake, a foundation every Fabric-enabled service plugs into by default. The lake isn't just for storage, it's about enforcing access rules, tracking where data's been, and ensuring that any change, whether it's permission tweaks, compliance tagging, or retention policies, travels with the data no matter what tool touches it next. Instead of admins chasing after rogue data sets or piecing together a story after the fact, they see the lineage and governance trail right from the start. It's as if the data comes with its own passport automatically stamped at every border crossing. The workflow for data pros shifts too. Rather than spending hours stitching together ETL jobs and JSON templates to pipe data from one service to another, work happens from a single workspace. All the governance and compliance controls follow the data from tool to tool. Everything is visible together. Who's touching what data with what result and at which moment. The need for creating endless copies just to share data sets for reporting, for machine learning, for basic exports has been replaced with frictionless real-time access. Troubleshooting stops feeling like a maze and starts resembling a single map. Here's the twist though. The move to Fabric changes more than just workflows and architecture. It also reshapes how you license and pay for the stack. stack. Fabric compresses multiple subscriptions into one covering Power BI, Synapse, Data Factory, and the related services under this umbrella. That sounds simpler, and it is, mostly, but there are real decisions about how you allocate capacity, assign roles, and track usage. Some organizations will need to rethink how they size their environment, especially as data consumption shifts from isolated bursts in separate tools to a more unified stream across the board. The bottom line is that Fabric's architecture isn't just cleaner on paper, it's fundamentally more powerful. The one lake approach finally lets governance and security scale with your actual data use, not just your wishful diagrams. Efficiency goes up, audit headaches go down, and admins regain control in a way that mountains of connectors simply couldn't deliver. So, what's the impact where it matters most? Inside team workflows and in daily admin life. Here's how those changes actually play out for data pros and M365 admins. Real-world workflows, how admins and data pros benefit. If you've managed data for any length of time in Microsoft 365, you know that access control is rarely a one-click job. Picture the usual routine. You're poking through 3 separate admin panels just to answer one question. Who actually has access to this sales data set? At some point, there's always that folder where the permissions drifted or an account that never got shut down. Multiply that by every business unit, and you start to understand why most admins feel like they're running an endless audit treadmill. The worst part is even the most diligent teams end up missing something along the way. A single folder with the wrong data loss prevention policy, or a user who transferred departments but kept their old role, and data governance goes out the window again. Then there's the classic, each tool in the stack keeps its own secrets. Power BI, Synapse, and Data Factory all generate logs on who's viewing, sharing, or exporting which data, but they don't talk to each other. If you want to track sensitive financial or health records across the organization, you're piecing together stories from 3, 4, or 5 logs that don't even use the same time zone. Every compliance review turns into a scavenger hunt with changing clues. Take a healthcare organization as an example. IT is tasked with tracing every access to patient data across Power BI's dashboards, Synapse Analytics, and Data Factory pipelines, and the result is 3 independent audit trails. If an incident pops up, there's no single place to see the data's full journey. You're matching up usernames and timestamps by hand and hoping nothing critical falls through the cracks. Fabric flips that whole workflow on its head. Instead of scrambling to answer the same permission question in different dashboards, you get a unified view. Monitoring, policy management, and access control all live in one place and operate across every data service plugged into Fabric. One Lake sits at the heart of this, not just storing your data, but acting as the enforcement point for every security and compliance policy. The difference is immediate. Set a data retention policy once, and it follows your information whether it's used in a quick Power BI chart, a Synapse machine learning model, or an operational pipeline in Data Factory. You aren't recreating the same rules in every service. One Lake does the heavy lifting with security and compliance controls applied globally rather than app by app. For admins, this isn't just convenient, it's the end of governance whack-a-mole. The scattered error-prone process of updating permissions, chasing down manual policy rollouts, or scrambling at audit time gets replaced with policies that travel with your data automatically. Need to see exactly where a sensitive data set landed? Fabric's lineage tools map the entire chain in plain language, down to who viewed, modified, or exported each item. Instead of catching issues after the fact, you actually have a fighting chance to spot risks early before they snowball. The impact for data professionals is just as clear. Gone are the days of exporting a clean batch from Data Factory, uploading it into Synapse, and then shuffling it once more into Power BI just to make a dashboard. With Fabric, data pipelines span the entire Microsoft Analytics stack end-to-end with no detours for manual exports. You build a data flow once, it's instantly accessible wherever you need to analyze or visualize. Models, transformations, and even data masking settings move with the source. So what you see in the Power BI dashboard is actually what's stored in One Lake, with full fidelity and without the mysterious version creep that always slips in after the 5th copy. For teams that depend on up-to-date business intelligence, that single chain is a game changer. Here's where things really shift. Fabric introduces new governance dashboards, which are actually worth looking at. Real-time, detailed views into who's accessing data, what actions they're taking, and how policies are being enforced. Forget about combing through raw logs and hoping you didn't miss a line buried in yesterday's export. The entire data estate appears in a single bird's-eye view, letting admins and security teams understand usage trends, spot potential breaches, and document compliance automatically. You want to run audits on regulated datasets. Fabric's audit trails show you activity across all tools. No need to cross-reference events from 3 different sources and hope the clocks line up. An actual case speaks volumes. In one organization piloting Fabric, the admin set a 3-year retention policy for any employee data tagged as sensitive. Before Fabric, enforcing this meant configuring PowerBI, Synapse, and Data Factory individually, triple-checking each policy, and then circling back after any update or migration. Now, that admin sets the policy once in Fabric, and it's live everywhere. No extra steps. Policy updates take effect across the entire system. There's no hunting for stray files or redoing work after a reorg. Of course, real control is about more than just policy enforcement. It's about visibility and the capacity to respond. When something unexpected comes up, a spike in data access from a partner or an employee downloading more rows than usual, Fabric's unified monitoring lets you see and act fast. That kind of awareness just wasn't feasible when you were parsing logs by hand or jumping between apps. So finally, admins and data pros get a grip on sprawling data environments. No matter how many departments, datasets, or dashboards you run, there's a consistent end-to-end view that covers it all. With unified governance and analytics actually built into the workflow, control is no longer out of reach for the people tasked with keeping things secure and compliant. But it does raise a final lingering question. Has Fabric truly banished the underlying mess, or is it just a shinier interface for the same old tangle underneath? The limits and future promise of Fabric. If you manage data in Microsoft 365, you've probably heard the pitch for Fabric loud and clear. One platform to rule them all, every tool you need under a single roof, the end of endless patching. It's tempting, but the first question for any of us is, does Fabric really solve the classic game of data whack-a-mole, or are we just moving the moles to a new field? Under the logo and the streamlined interface, every platform this big comes with new edge cases and tough realities that don't show up in marketing slides. The architecture is, for the most part, a leap forward. Having one lake at the center as the shared pool for all your Power BI, Data Factory, and Synapse workloads does simplify a lot. You don't have to hunt for which copy is current or patch security holes that only exist because a batch job created a rogue dataset 2 months back. But it doesn't mean everything is perfect. Right now, not every single feature from the standalone Power BI, Synapse, or Data Factory worlds has made it across to Fabric. There are definitely some, wait, where did that button go? Moments, especially if you're migrating complex reporting models or custom integrations. For organizations with a long Microsoft history, the legacy challenge is real. If you're running financial systems built around classic Power BI workspaces or machine learning jobs coded for Synapse pipelines 3 years ago, those setups don't always move into Fabric without hiccups. Consider a global firm that stores compliance data split between 4 continents, each governed by policies built layer upon layer since before one lake was even a thing. Bringing all of that into Fabric can shine a light on some buried decisions, old rules that nobody remembers setting, region-specific retention policies, sensitive access grants that predate your cloud migration. Sometimes those policies transfer cleanly. Other times, you find yourself mapping, refactoring, or even rewriting whole chunks of the way data flows and how compliance is checked. It's not a simple lift and shift, especially if you depend on integrations that operate outside Microsoft's standard patterns. So some of the friction isn't technical, it's about people. Early headcounts from Fabric pilots say the governance story is smoother. You set rules once, see instant results everywhere, and report out without stitching together old logs. But teams still find themselves facing a brand new learning curve. Capacity management shifts from side-by-side calculations to broader platform planning. Role definitions, which used to be simple Power BI admin or Synapse owner, start to blur. Data engineers, analysts, and business users start to overlap in the Fabric workspaces, and someone has to untangle who owns what and who's allowed to make changes. Some admins miss the control panels they knew by heart. There's always someone who's memorized every tab in the old Power BI dashboard and now needs to relearn from scratch. Licensing is a mixed bag. For a lot of organizations, the new model is easier to predict. The days of tracking dozens of overlapping subscriptions and figuring out which users need what license level are fading. You buy Fabric capacity and your connected services are included. Simple, at least on the surface. But the switch nudges organizations to rethink budgets and user management. Heavy users and data-hungry workloads can quickly eat through available capacity, so estimating needs gets tricky when consumption spikes across more services than ever. Data pros and finance teams have to align earlier in the project cycle to make sure the business gets what it's promised without overdrafting on resources. Of course, Microsoft knows there are gaps and isn't hiding from that. The update cadence on Fabric is fast. New features roll out every few weeks as engineers patch missing functionality and bring over advanced analytics capabilities that heavy users have grown attached to. But early adopters report that for certain advanced scenarios, workarounds are still the name of the game. For example, running complex predictive analytics or supporting specialty data connectors sometimes demands a workaround, or even holding on to legacy environments side by side with Fabric just to cover every need. If your workflows depend on the edge of what Synapse or Power BI used to offer, expect to see some creative solutions in the short term. The reality is most organizations benefit from piloting Fabric in a focused, low-risk environment at first. Set clear goals, bring together a cross-functional team that spans IT, security, and business users, and track what breaks, what improves, and where the gaps actually trip you up. You learn fast, your stakeholders get familiar, and you minimize surprises when you roll out wide. Is Fabric magic? No, but it is a true architectural shift, a move from patchwork to platform. That brings visible wins for governance, compliance, and day-to-day management, even if the transition demands new behaviors and careful planning up front. Mature teams who've started down the Fabric path are already trading hours spent on audits and policy rewrites for real visibility and smoother operations, even with feature gaps still in play. And that's where most of us want to be. Now comes the critical part. What does this actually mean for M365 admins and every data-driven team ready to finally move on from the old school mess? The reality is Fabric isn't another bolt-on or just a new tile on your M365 dashboard. For once, Microsoft built a backbone that actually connects the pieces. OneLake isn't just storage, it's where data governance, security, and analytics line up in one place so your policies make sense everywhere. If you build data solutions or just keep the lights on in Microsoft 365, now's the time to look at a Fabric pilot. Most of us already juggle too many workarounds. The question isn't if Fabric will take over, the pace will depend on how fast old habits get replaced.